Hey, John here again, back with another orchestral recipe. And just like in last week's video, we're gonna look at some Holst. And it's actually from the same piece as last week. It's from Venus, from the planets. And we're gonna look at 4 different things. But it's basically variations on the same concept. And that concept is something that I've seen different names for it, but the name that I liked the most and that made the most sense to me is contrary motion chords. So what that means is that you have chords moving in contrary motion, and I think the easiest way to explain that is just to look at we'll look at the oboe here. You see you have these triads that moves up, while in the flute we have a 4-note chord moving down, and as you can see here, you only got 2 notes to play here, but it's a 4-note chord. Like I said, we're gonna see a few different variations on the same concept. And as usual, we'll just start by listening to the first example here. So here we go. Okay, so it's a really cool sound if you ask me, and probably if you ask Holst as well, since he used it a bunch of times in this piece alone. So I haven't listened to everything by Holst, but I'm sure it pops up in other pieces as well. This solo horn part here, that's basically the main theme, or the very first thing we hear in this piece is this part. And then where we come in, it's the second repeat of this melody. And this melody also serves as the bass line because it's the lowest note. So we can't, even though it's the melody, it still will sound like the bass lines just by the fact that it's the lowest note. So we can't really get away from that. And I've seen this piece analyzed harmonically in a way that I feel is wrong, because if we go over to the piano version here, here you can see it's in F, and the key signature is C minor or E flat major, but the tonality, the tonal center is F. So if you're in E flat, the second note of an E flat scale is F, so that will make it a Dorian mode, and we saw that in the previous orchestral recipe as well, since it's from the same piece, so it's pretty logical. But what I've seen here is that, as you can see in the chord, whoops, sorry, I will move that. Okay, as you can see here with the chord symbol F minor 9, I've seen this piece analyzed as being in A flat, that the harmony starts out with A flat major 7, which is wrong. So you can see here chord A flat major 7, and that's true, but if you add this note F, you get an F minor ninth. And that's because if we look at it like this, oops, we got F, A flat, C, and that's a F minor triad. Then we got a E flat, and finally a G. So what this spells out, if we just take the top four notes of this F minor ninth, we get an A flat major 7. So it's part of the same triad stack. You see, when we build our regular harmony here, we stack triads, and that of course gives us many. If we see each note as the root note, for example, if we look at 3-note chords, we get an F minor, and if we look at it from this perspective, we get an A flat major triad, and finally a C minor triad here. So it's all depending on what you see as the root note, and it's all stacking here. So what we did here, we stacked the triads. We can stack it with 4-note chords or 5-note chords, and it's a really common thing to common concept in jazz improvisation, and also for getting a handle on voicings on bigger chords. Because let's say you want to you've just learned a minor ninth chord, you already know the major 7 chords in a lot of inversions. Let's say you're a guitar player like me, so you know that a major 7 chord in a lot of different ways all over the fretboard. The only thing you need to do to add to be able to use that for minor ninth voicings is to realize that instead of seeing the root of the major 7 chord as the root, you see it as the minor third of whatever minor ninth triad you want to play, minor ninth chord you want to play. So and this goes on and on with everything. So I'll probably make a video about this eventually, because it's a really cool concept, and it's really useful for getting a handle on bigger chords. But anyway, I'm rambling again, so sorry. Let's just listen to the piano version once as well. Okay, so it's obviously easier to see the harmony here when you don't have to look at all the different saves in the full score. And basically what this is you have the melody here / bass line, and then you have a counter melody, which is the top note here. And you'll see that again and again in all the other versions as well. So this top note counter melody, and once he had that top note counter melody, he simply harmonized it in the way he liked, and then he spaced the harmony like this. So this is just the same chord if you look at it, but it's just a gap in between, and then the gap closes since this part moves up and this part moves down. So, and they sort of meld in the middle. So that's basically the concept, and so it's not that hard to apply once you understand it. So what you want to do is to have a melody or just a bass line, or both, as it will be, and then compose your counter melody and then harmonize that however you want, and then make sure to space the chords with a gap in the middle, so they have the space to move. So the top goes down and the bottom goes up, and they meet here in the middle. Besides that, harmonically, you see there's a lot of big chords, which is kind of cool if you're used to more classical stuff. They came before this, I mean, the Romantic era. They had some of this, but this is really into jazz territory. So you get a F minor 9, G minor 7, and this one, A flat major 9, sharp 11, which is a mouthful. So it's pretty cool. But what he did here is that if you would harmonize this with just the triads from the mode, it could sound a bit bland. And since, I mean, the concept of the planets and all, it's supposed to sound a bit otherworldly, I think he stayed away from that and used extended harmony instead. And this is called upper structure triads. And I won't even go into what that means right now, but the only thing you need to know that instead of harmonizing your melody notes, and I just mean the top note here, instead of viewing this as either the root, third or fifth of a chord in the key or out of the key, as we looked at last time, you know, with 6 different triads, 3 major triads or 3 minor triads, he saw each note as basically anything other than 1, 3 or 5. So if we check this out, it's a G, and then he constructed a F minor chord below it, so it would be a F minor 9 chord. So you saw this as the 9. This is F, which is the flat 7 of the G minor 7. And here we have D, which is the sharp 4 or sharp 11 of the A flat. And if you're not used to these bigger intervals, you can just think -7 for each of them. So if you have 9 minus 7, you'll get 2. So 9 is the same as 2, 11 is the same as 4, and so on. So, this is it's a cool chord. And let's see, let's just go through these. So we got C, which is the 9 of the 9th of the B flat, and then we have the flat 7 of C minor 7, and finally we end up in a new key, which is D flat minor. And D flat minor is, if we just look at the note F and D flat, the interval is that D flat is the minor 6th of an F minor scale. But in the Dorian scale, we would have used the natural minor, natural 6. Sorry. So, but if you look at the melody note here, it's an A flat. So all these notes are just part of the F minor scale. So we got the 9, root, and here's the Dorian note, the natural 6, and then we have C, which is the 5th, and we have B flat, which is the 4th, and then we have A flat, which is the minor 3rd. So this just spells out the Dorian scale, F Dorian scale. So that's why it sounds cool, but it doesn't sound like, oh hey, what's happening, you know, yeah, when it moves to this key. So if you listen to, it's just a cool sound, and that's because the minor third is such a strong note in the scale, and so instead of the do, and though actually, yeah, I sorry, that's my point. That the melody itself is diatonic, but he changed harmonization, and this is exactly the same concept that we looked at last time as well, with the different triad choices. And in this case, he chose to view this as the fifth of this chord, of the D flat minor chord. So I mean, other choices he could have used seen it as the root of an A flat major chord, or the root of an A flat minor chord, or you can see it as the fifth of a D flat minor, like it did, or fifth of a D flat major, or you could see it as the fifth of the minor third of the F minor, and let's see what's left. Oh yeah. Okay, but anyway, but he shows D flat minor, and then when he repeats exactly the same thing, except for the landing note here. So now we're in D flat instead. Like we said, D flat minor. So we when actually it's D flat Dorian. So exactly the same melody. Except here, he goes to the. It's probably easier to view it. I put everything in C here, so it's easier to see the difference. So here's the first one. So now we're in C Dorian instead. We got ninth root, the natural sixth, which is the Dorian note, and we got the fourth. Fifth, fourth, and minor third. And here, exactly the same thing. So fourth, but instead of moving to the minor third, he moves to the major third. And finally, this version here, exactly the same thing. And here it goes to the minor third again, but then the second, and then it moves up to another key, so it goes back to the fourth. But it's so I hope that's not too confusing. So, but again, here's the value of taking something that you're comparing and transposing it to the same key. It's easier to see the differences. So when you don't have to think about all the what key you're in and how it relates to each other. I mean, that you will learn that eventually, but it's a good tool to use, because it can be easy to miss this stuff even if you're used to it, because to be honest, a key like D flat minor is not a key that I'm as comfortable in as, let's say, F minor. So, and I mean, sure, I could work a lot in D flat minor and remove that weakness, but if you want to get on with stuff and the important stuff here is to learn the concepts and learn how it all relates to each other. And all this transposing and all that stuff, that's more of an orchestrational issue at the end of the day, because you want to when it comes to orchestration, the key you're in is really important, as well as if you're working with singers. But that's also orchestration, because a singer, all singers have different ranges, and that's sort of like your solo instrument. So you have to fit the music you have to fit the orchestration to the music, or vice versa. I think you know what I mean. So yeah, you have to keep it in a key that's good for this soloist. So it's a no shame in transposing it like this. I feel it's rather a great tool. Before we're gonna go back to look at the difference in orchestration again. But so basically we have the same musical material to work with, exactly the same voicings here. The only difference is the key we end up in, and this one is it's kind of weird. It's really high, and you're gonna see the orchestration is kind of cool, but it's the same type of deal here with the harmony. And I actually put this on one stave because it fit, and it's a good way to see how everything sort of, you have a gap here and then it moves closer and sort of melts together. It's kind of cool. And the melody here in the bottom is basically the same. Here it's just extended for another bar, so nothing really spectacular. So with that said, let's just go back to the orchestration here. So we'll listen to the first one again. Okay, and so we have the chord that goes from low to high in 3 oboes here, and like we said before, we have the flutes up high going down, and that's a pretty logical thing, you know, because of the ranges. So nothing out of the ordinary here, really. And when it comes to how you distribute the notes, it's just about finding the best parts for the instruments. So, because like we saw in the reduced version, we have the same voicings in each of the keys we looked at. So how you orchestrate those notes, that's really up to you. You just have to make sure that they're all there, and you don't want to cross registers too much, depending on what the instruments you use. But so you don't lose an important note because it's sort of masked by the instruments that plays over it. But so that's the one with the oboes going up, and this is the same thing, just major third down, so it's a bit lower, obviously, but otherwise it's the same. And the only thing that's different is that we have 3 clarinets playing the lower part, because the horn is exactly the same as well, so still a solo horn. And the dynamics and all that stuff. So if we just listen to the whole thing first, but try to notice that the clarinets sound a bit softer I feel, than the oboes. So let's hear it. Okay. So not really that much more to say about these two. But here's the one that sticks out a bit. And I'm gonna do this here, because we have the flute playing the bass line / melody, but then we have the strings, violins 1 and 2, playing the counter line really high here. And it's also sordinos. Sorry, wrong way. So consordino, that means mute, and you get a more, sort of Bernard Herrmann type sound. He used it a lot. But it's really common. So, and it's in the original score. It says this is obviously divisi. It would sound horrible if you would play this without divisi. And in the original score it says 4 desks. So 4 desks here and 4 desks here. And if I'm not totally wrong, I think 1 desk is 2 players. So that would mean that it's 2 players per note here. For the 4 parts at least. And like before, it's the same harmony, just a different instrumentation. And I really like this one. And I have to say that I use Note Performer to play these examples. It's from Wallander Instruments. I love this plugin to death. But in this case, it really doesn't do the music justice. But we'll play it anyway, but just keep that in mind. And obviously, I really hope that you actually go and listen to real orchestral recordings of everything we're looking at. And if you want me to start adding the time and maybe even what recording I'm listening to, just mention that in the comments and I will do that. But it's really important that you listen to the real orchestral versions. You probably already do that, but just in case. And like I said, this doesn't really do the music justice, but we'll listen anyway. So we got a flute. And you can even hear it there in the samples that it's pretty low for the flute. I mean, it's within the first octave of the instrument. This is a B flat. It's almost the last note of the octave. So it's quite low, but it doesn't matter since the dynamics are also low. So as long as you're below MF, you're fine with pretty much any instrumental combination, because it's much easier for them to blend at below MF. So this works great anyway. And this is a solo flute. But what I wanted to say, that even here with the samples, you can hear when the flute gets up to around here, it starts to really get into its own good register. So one of the best registers for the flute, for melodic stuff anyway, is the octave from G here. Well, now it's a G flat, but G above the staff to 1 octave higher than that. So I guess that's G5 to G6. Anyway, let's listen to this. But like I said, you have to listen to the orchestral recording because it sounds, it doesn't sound anything like it. So, but anyway, here we go. But the orchestration is fantastic, and it's a really cool thing to have in your toolbox. So I hadn't thought about this before I checked this example out. So having the flute below the strings and this huge divisi and the chords moving in contrary motion to each other is such a cool thing. But a good thing a good habit to get into if you study stuff like this, I mean breaking it down like I do here, is to try to put into words how you feel about just orchestration. I mean, you can include the whole example, of course, but just orchestrationally, this should work for whatever melodic material or harmonic material you're using. This concept of having the flute in this register and then having the strings above it in a counterline, harmonized however you like it. So that's sort of what I mean with the recipes. So the recipes can be really specific, that you take the orchestration and the harmonic information and even maybe how the melodies are laid out, but also just taking away specific elements of it. That's cool. And this orchestrational thing is something that I hadn't thought about before. And it's another really cool thing is that since you're studying actual orchestral music that's been proven in concert halls all over the world for, in some cases, hundreds of years, you know that it works. I mean, this is not some obscure piece. This is played probably every day somewhere in the world. So it's nothing strange about it. So that's sort of a confidence you can have. So if you get the chance to write for a real orchestra someday, you'll have, if you have studied music that actually been played by real orchestras for years, you know that your tools are you can trust them, you know. And the difference there, if you would listen to you get a hold of a score of Hans Zimmer or any of the more film score guys that is more media venture, remote control, I don't know what they're called these days, but I mean there's so much studio recordings and samples and all that stuff, so you can't really trust that orchestration to work live. And I think Hans would be the first to tell you that. And there's nothing wrong with that, but if you want to write, be able to write for the orchestra, I think it's better to focus on real orchestral music. Meaning real, I'm not making a value judgment here, but real in the sense that it's been proven to work for orchestra without anything else added. So, but like you heard here, it sounds kind of weird with samples, those high strings. But check out the real version anyway. But what else to say about this? Yeah, the melody here is actually doubled. Well, the melody / bass line is doubled here by the... But it's still its own thing because this one starts out and this comes in here. So that's an important thing as well to make it, even though it's playing at the same time, when things start has an impact on how you perceive it. So you really perceive this as different ideas because the starting times are different. Okay, but again, The flute. Same here. Same notes. So that gets the support of 2 violins as well. Okay, so let's go back to the last example. This is a bit longer, but it's basically the same idea. I'm gonna try to find the relevant instruments here, and I hope you're not too bored seeing me wrestle with this program. So Celeste and harp, whoops, harp 1 and harp 2, and then the strings. So I don't know if this really makes a difference when we look at the full score. And I don't know why Sibelius keeps doing that. Please work. Okay, here we go. So this is obviously not ideal, but really to see if I actually, yeah, I did. Okay. The most important part here is actually the woodwinds and the horn and this part here. But so the strings are mainly playing the root note here and 5-1, and then leading into the chord that comes after the whole thing. So I think we'll start out just by looking at the woodwinds. And we can do this so we can see the counter line as well, or the bridge. Okay, first of all, we're gonna listen to it. So here we go. Okay. So what's going on here is the same thing as in the other examples, but the difference is that it's we don't really have that horn melody anymore, and we have changed key as well. Well, not key, we've changed mode. So instead of being in Dorian mode, we're in the parent key, the E flat major, because what you hear in the beginning is this thing here. So root, 5th root, in E flat. Then you have an ascending bass line here. But what you probably will recognize is this. The top line here. Right? Difference is, of course, that it's in the same rhythm. So the other rhythms were, oh, you can see the difference here. Starts out the same, but then it was chord half notes here, and here it keeps going in quarters the whole way. But it's the same pattern that we heard before. Actually, it's exactly the same. But of course, it's since we have let's see if I'm correct here. Well, it's the same sort of pattern, but it's not the same. Sorry, but you recognize it, I'm sure. So and that's harmonized and using the same technique as before. We have a low triads moving up. Well, actually, if we combine it with the bass line here, we have 4-note chords. And it is, if you see the orchestration here, it looks a bit deceiving, but what it is that so the sort of leapfrogging each other here, the parts. So this is the highest part, this is second highest part, third highest, and the lowest. And instrumentation, clarinets, pretty low here. Bass clarinet, that's a new one. And if we look at the piano version here, you can see that just listen to that once. Okay, so I've written some reminders here. So it's the same melody, bass line, this here. Exactly the same, just 1 octave lower. And here we have the bass line at first. So on, and then we have 1 octave lower here. So this is the first one, and this is where it repeats. So, and this is also a common technique, that you have something in one register and then you can repeat exactly the same thing 1 octave lower or higher, and just change the instrumentation. So you actually double your written material by expanding it like that. So it's a pretty useful thing to have, and it's really good for cohesion as well, because you get to repeat the material, the harmonic and melodic material, without it sounding boring, or yeah, you know what I mean. But harmonically here we have it's the E flat major scale. So we start out with the E flat here, and then we go to the 7th scale degree, so D minor 7 flat 5, E flat major 7, which is 1 chord, and then it just moves up the scale. And same thing here, it starts out with a gap and closes the gap and goes into well, the voicings sort of combine. And nothing weird to talk about here, except that this chord here, F minor 7 with B flat in the bass, and I also have B flat 11 here. So what's the deal with that? Well, if you just listen to this, you'll hear it sounds like a 5 chord, dominant 5 chord, so it leads into the 1 chord again. Okay, and that's exactly what it is, but the only thing that it's missing is the D, which is the leading tone. but this is really common in jazz, again, to use this chord. And why I have it notated in different ways is because you see it like this often as well. Because if you write B flat 11, theoretically, if you have a 11th chord, do this in C major, you would have 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, and finally on 11. But as you hear here, that sounds like shit. And that's because we get a clash between this note, E, and F. So that's a minor ninth interval. And that's not a nice sound. It can be a very effective sound if that's what you're going for, but it's really, you see here, it really sounds like it, and this tends to stick out a lot however you orchestrate it, so it can be hard to get away from that. So it can kind of sound like a mistake if you're not careful, but if you want the effect, fine. And of course, if we move it down 1 octave, you see it's a half note. And another thing that's really bad about it is that, well, it's really confusing to the ear. So that's why it's a bad thing to use. So the solution that people came up with, because theoretically this is the way a chord, 11th chord should be, because you stack thirds. And you have to have all the notes in order to call it the 11th here. But so what people started doing was either to sharp the 11th, and that works better, a bit funky, but a more common thing to, but it wouldn't work. We would go out of the key here, but just the chord itself, you could do that. But what people started doing was to remove the third. So if you really wanted the 11th, and they really wanted 11th here, because it's a different sound. So the solution is to remove the third. And if you look at this, if we remove the C, we have G, B flat, D, sorry, G, B flat, D, F. And that spells out G minor 7 chord. So, and if you have a minor 7 chord, and well, in this case we have G minor 7, and we add the C in the bass. Oops. We add the C in the bass, you get this sound. So, but it's functioning as a B dominant 11th or B 11th. But a way around this, so people that wasn't that knowledgeable about chord building, so to make sure that they didn't include the third in the chord, they would write it out like this, like a minor 7 chord with the 4th in the bottom. I hope that's clear, but it's basically it's just a 5 chord, but it's a bit more spicy. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, okay, so that's that, and then we have exactly the same thing again, but if you listen to this, it sounds kind of out there. And it's kind of incredible how jazzy it sounds since it's written so early in the 20th century. It's cool. Anyway, this voicing here is the same chord, but it's really low. So it sounds kind of weird, especially with these ones added. But there's no note out of key or anything. But one of the things is that you get a flat 5 between these two, and it's in such a low register. So, but the effect is, if we listen to that again, and you can sort of hear that it's, when it keeps going up, it keeps getting clearer. So it's really muddy and sort of almost sinister sounding down here, and then it gradually keeps getting clearer, and that's a kind of cool effect, I feel. So listen to it from that perspective. Cool, right? And before we look at orchestration again, oh yeah, here the first 4 voicings are different. 1, 2, 3, 4. The last three the same, and that's compared to this. But that's just because this voicing this low would sound even worse. I think it wouldn't really work. So that's why it's different. So once it gets up in a more reasonable register for chords, it's goes back to the original. Yeah, so we got the 5 chord again here, B flat 11, or if you want to look at it like an F minor 7 with B flat in the bass, and it goes into E flat 9. So this is very jazz bluesy sounding, so it goes into a dominant chord. So it's a cool sound. Oh yeah, here, bridge. That's when it comes to the elements here again. It's sort of like a fill, but it's not. A fill is more a response to the main melody. So when the main melody stops, you would have a fill to sort of respond to that, like a call and answer type thing almost. A bridge here, the difference with a bridge is that it's usually exactly something like this, just a scale, wow, that's a hard thing to say. Scalular, there we go. Line that moves up or down, usually up, can be harmonized or just in octaves like this, and it leads you into the next section, and that's exactly what it does. So here, listen to it again. It's perfect. Okay, so that's the difference between a bridge and a fill. Let's see here if I missed something. Oh, and also you got a G minor 7 here, and this starts on a G, and then it goes up to C, which is of course the major third of this chord, and then we start over at G again, and we got G minor here, and here we have E flat, which is the flat 7 of the F minor 7 chord, or the 11th of the B flat 11, and it leads into the 5th of E flat 9. So that's why if you listen to the bridge here, it's really smooth. We can listen to that again, and you hear that it sort of doesn't clash with the other chords or melody at all. Okay, and that's because it starts on the right. Whenever something hits at the same time, you want the interval to be good. So and they're all good here. It's always a chord tone. Whenever you hear a new chord hit at the same time as this, and here it also starts out. It's staggered. That's also important to make this sort of like its own element. So you want to have the entrance sort of noticeable. And a double good thing here is that it's the staggered entrance which make it oblique. So, and oblique intervals, you always get away with more dissonances that way. And oblique just means that you don't hit two notes at the same time. You hit one first and then the other. So it doesn't sound as harsh. You can try this on a piano. Let's just play C and C sharp on a piano. Play C first and then you play C sharp and compare it to playing the keys at the same time. And you obviously playing it at the same time sounds way more harsh. But anyway, the double good thing here is that you get the most blendable tone, because you have a G minor 7 and then you have a G here, so it's this exactly the same note. I mean the root, so it blends really well here, and also it comes in obliquely, so that's why it sort of sneaks in. I think that's about it here. So let's just go over the orchestration again for it. And nothing really strange here. So we can listen to it again. Okay, so even more here when you have three bassoons playing this low, growly, sinister part. But again, it sort of comes out from the depth, and then when it goes up, it's just gets clearer and clearer. So it's a cool effect. And again, here's the melody, and now it's doubled by the bass clarinet. And the bridge is played by a combination of harp and celeste. And also the harp gets the low E flats here. What else? I have a second harp just helping out here. And the violins come in right at the end. It's into the chord. And also the double bass and cellos help out here with establishing the key. And then you have the 5-1 there. It's really, really clear 5-1. 5. Okay, and same here. But like we saw in the other, in the reduced score, instead of going to the major chord, major 7 chord, it goes to a dominant 9 chord. Well, we can just listen to this part. I find that kind of cool. So this kind of writing is a good example of why I really like the part about composing the music first and then worrying about orchestration. And of course you can add if you start out with a concept of orchestration, which is fine, you can just notate that in your sketch, because if you know that you want this line here, it's much easier to try out different orchestration, and also it's easier to come up with the idea here and get an overview of it instead of sitting in the full score. And probably John Williams wouldn't have a problem with writing in full score, and a lot of other composers as well, but even Williams uses sketches, even though they're really detailed. But I know that Howard Shore writes music sort of abstractly. So he sketches and he just thinks about the music and not really instrumentation at all. So whatever works for you, but I find this works really well for me as well. Mainly this, because you don't have to keep all this stuff in mind. But if you ask me in 20 years, maybe I'll write in full score directly. Who knows? But for now, I'm doing it the sketch way mostly. And also, let's see. This, like I think I mentioned this before, but the planets were composed originally for 2 pianos. So this is the actual piano scores. Oh, and we're at this very part as well. Okay, so here we have the 2 pianos, 1, 2. So here's the E flat, and the first version with the flutes going down. Then we got the 5-1, and then we have the really low part. Whoop. So you see, I didn't look at this when I did my reduction, but it's pretty darn close. It's basically exactly the same thing. And I read that Holst's daughter, Imogen Holst, wrote, I think maybe it was the preface to this score or somewhere else. I don't remember. But she said that when he wrote the planets, he didn't feel that the pianos could really give that depth of experience that he wanted for this big work. So he wanted to arrange it for orchestra. But he composed everything on piano first, and then he had some sort of problems with his hands. So he had problems notating. So, and he was a music professor, so he had 2 of his students come over at, I think it was Saturdays or something, and play the piano version for him while he dictated the orchestration. So he didn't orchestrate this. He orchestrated it, but he didn't do it by hand himself. So they actually sat down and notated on the piano score what the orchestration would be. That's kind of a cool story. So they would, you would probably say like, oh, this part here, it's flutes and blah blah blah. So they just wrote it down. So that's a pretty cool thing. But I one thing that I found, let's see here, in last week's score, if I could find it. Oh yeah, here it is. You remember the shallow part coming in here, and then the huge string section that I talked about, the huge string instrument. You see here that in my score, I have this note notated as a quarter note, and also this note here, and all the orchestral versions I've looked at, if I would have transcribed them, I would have written a quarter note as well, because no one is playing it as a eighth note, because it sounds really cut off that way. But I think what has happened is that since he didn't orchestrate it by hand himself, he has told his students to, because the difference isn't that big when you play this on piano, like it is when you have a cello doing it, you know. So on the piano version, it probably sounds fine like this, but on cello it sounds sort of cut off. And I think what happened was that since he didn't orchestrate it himself, meaning that he didn't write it in the score himself, he just dictated this and said that, oh, this will be cello, this line here. He probably they probably overlooked the note length. So that's just a quick aside. But anyway, again, I haven't looked over everything in this score and compared it to the original orchestration. But it's every part that I've looked at has been very similar to my reductions. So it's virtually everything is there in the piano music. So and like I've said before, we've seen the same with Ravel, who's seen as one of the best orchestrators ever. So I think it's a lot of merit to this way of working, to focus on the music first, and then it's easier to compartmentalize the different tasks. And I think Ron Jones is a composer for Family Guy and a lot of stuff, Star Trek, amazing composer and great teacher as well. And he said in a seminar that he recommends this way of working as well. So focus on sketching first, and then get the music right, and then he even goes back to, you know, the main thing that I talked about before in previous videos, and go from there. So because his idea is that it's sort of like juggling. If you have too many things to think about, you can only, if you have 3 things to think about, you can realistically only use 33.33333% of your brain on that task. So if you have one thing instead, you can have if not 100%, at least a lot more than if you have to focus on 3 things at the same time. So try that out if you have a problem with writing for orchestra. Just come up with music that you like in sketch form, and then you know that the music works, and then you can try different orchestrations out, because it's a comforting feeling to know that, okay, I know that this works, but if it doesn't work for orchestra, it's probably because my understanding of orchestration isn't where it should be yet. So, and getting it to where it should be is a lifelong process, but it's also a matter of practice. So the more you do stuff like this, the more you will improve, and so on. Okay, so let's see. I think we're gonna zoom out here and listen to this thing again before we look at my short example. Cool stuff. Okay, so here's my version, and let's just get right into it. Well, almost, at least. I'm gonna do this. I probably could edit this out, but I won't, because I'd rather do more videos instead of doing short edits all over the place. It just takes a lot of time. So I hope you don't hate me for it, but Ah, okay. Now I know what I did wrong. I have to get that one, and okay, nothing here. Just have to make sure that I get all the instruments. So there we go. Wrong way. Okay. So I did my own version of sort of like more of the first 3 versions. It's based on the first A, B, and C examples we looked at. But it's basically the same technique, but I've changed. I have a ascending bass line here, and it's in C Dorian. And let's see. I got my chords in the clarinets because I like that softer sound, and then we got the flutes here. And my melody, my counter melody, goes up again, but it still works. So it's I wanted to try something different, so I didn't do exactly the same thing. And also I added the celeste here and the glockenspiel. So, and the celeste is sort of arpeggiated between both hands. So if you just listen to this, just really pingy. Okay, so let's see. In the bass line / melody is French horn, and 1 octave lower the bass clarinet. Okay, so here we go. Okay, and this thing here is just sort of a rip up the B. I outline B. Let's see, G minor 7 arpeggio from G here up to. Okay, so we can listen to it once more. Okay, so that's it, and I compose it like this. Let's see where it's at. Oh, here it is. So I started by writing the melodies. Okay, and then I harmonized the melody, and I used some bigger chords. You see A flat major 13, sharp 11. So I didn't want to use regular triads here, but the melody notes in of themselves are mostly actually roots and fifths. Here we got a 9 root and the 13 here. So, but so it's sort of a blend between regular old boring harmonization, but since we have these more extended chords, it doesn't sound that bad. So here's the piano version. And the rip in the flutes, I added that in the orchestration, so that's nothing that I had in the sketch, as you can see here. So I think that's about it for now. And I hope you like this, and as before, It's a YouTube channel, so the more subscribers I get, the more I can keep doing this. And so tell your friends, and please subscribe, comment, and also, yeah, like as well. I always forget that one. And I try to keep this pretty loose and not too super edited. I want to almost like a conversation between, like a talking to a friend. So I hope you enjoy that format, because it's more fun to do, and I think it's hopefully more enjoyable to listen to. But another thing, as you can see, I tend to get into sort of like stuff besides what we're talking about, so it's sort of like extra things. So, but if you hear something like that and it's like, oh, I would like you to talk more about that, just shoot me an email or leave a comment or whatever. And if you have anything specific you would like me to cover, same thing goes. But for now, that's it, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye bye.